A terrifying mutated virus suddenly broke out in the Arctic. Within a few hours, the tissues of infected people would turn into black blood. Although a few people could survive, they would become zombies. What on earth is going on? When the virus first broke out, the relevant people noticed it right away and reported it right away. The company took this super seriously. They quickly teamed up with the military and sent an elite team to investigate pronto. The team leader was named Alan, a famous biology doctor. Alan was a little reluctant about this sudden appointment, because there were many experts in the group who were more professional than him. After learning about his doubts, the group patiently explained to Alan. It was learned that among the first 3 infected people, one was his younger brother Peter. Upon hearing the news, Alan was very shocked. Then he decisively accepted the company's arrangement and led the other 3 team members to rush to the research base in the Arctic. During this period, team member Sarah noticed that Alan seemed to be at odds with a member named Julia. Later she learned from team member Doran that Julia and Alan were once a couple, but they divorced because of something. There was a rumor that Alan's younger brother Peter had an affair with Julia. Soon after, the 4 finally arrived at their destination. Dr. Sanada, the head of the research base, warmly received everyone. Under his lead, the relevant staff implanted access chips for the base into the 4 of them. After all this was done, they took the elevator to the research institute. Alan went to check on his brother at the first time. It was worth noting that Julia was also very anxious to go with Alan. Perhaps the rumor wasn't just a rumor. The 2 came to the isolation room and were shocked by the scene in front of them. Peter's body was covered with black blood vessels, and the other 2 infected people had completely ulcerated at this time. According to the current situation, it was inferred that Peter was almost impossible to survive the night. Perhaps feeling his brother's arrival, Peter suddenly relaxed a little and looked less painful. Just as the 2 of Alan were about to breathe a sigh of relief and carefully ask Peter some questions, an accident suddenly occurred. Peter suddenly lost control and attacked the 2. Luckily, Alan and they reacted quickly and took down their brother. Then they injected Peter with a sedative to prevent him from becoming violent again and hurting others. Peter was now in a very dangerous situation, and an antidote must be developed as soon as possible. Because the 2 had never come into contact with such a thing before, they planned to start with the pathogen. In order to figure out the source of the pathogen, Alan went to Peter's room alone to look for useful clues. By chance, he sought his brother's work diary and found that there was actually a video specially left for him by his brother. When watching, Alan noticed that his brother maintained a special movement throughout the whole process. This was a gesture that only they brothers understood, implying the intention to escape. Alan couldn't understand why his younger brother wanted him to escape. After leaving his younger brother's room, Alan went back to the isolation room again, and was shocked to find that his younger brother had actually disappeared. It seemed that he broke through the metal ceiling with his bare hands, and then escaped into the ventilation duct. In order to ensure the safety of other laboratory personnel, Dr. Sanada decided to inject toxic gas into the duct, sacrificing Peter in exchange for overall safety. Although Alan was reluctant to accept it, he could only agree. His only request was to bring back his younger brother's remains. Dr. Sanada didn't refuse. Shortly after, Alan went into the duct to search for his younger brother Peter's body. Not long after, he found a man's body, but when he approached, he found that the body wasn't Peter, but a member of the security team. But the palm of this member with authority was cut off, obviously taken away by Peter. This way, it could be inferred that Peter had already left the ventilation duct, and everyone in the whole base would face great danger. At the same time, team member Doran was still completely unaware of all this. She was preparing for a live experiment in the laboratory, but was astonished to find that such a huge research institution had no monkeys as experimental subjects. In desperation, she could only use mice instead for the experiment. After research, Doran found that the transmission method of this mysterious virus was very strange, not the usual air transmission. Just when Doran was preparing to conduct further research, Assistant John accidentally found monkey hair in the sewer. Doran realized right away that the laboratory staff were lying, but she couldn't understand why those people wanted to hide this matter. In order to figure out the reason behind it, Doran took Assistant John to secretly look into the secrets of the research institute. Soon, they noticed that there was a room that was deliberately locked, obviously not wanting outsiders to walk in. Doran determined that it was likely the source of all this inside. After that, Assistant John used the lockpicking skills he learned in the army to open the door. When the 2 went into the room, they were shocked to find that it was filled with cages for monkeys. There were obviously many monkeys inside, but due to some operations of the research institute, hundreds of monkeys almost all died. Just when they thought there were no surviving monkeys here, an accident suddenly occurred. Luckily, John quickly shot and killed it. Afterwards, it was observed that the monkey was also infected, and Doran guessed that this monkey was the source of the virus. At the same time, Sarah and Julia were also busy researching the virus. They found that although the virus was very tiny, only 15 nanometers, it looked more like a parasite. In addition, there was no record of this virus in the existing database at all. Julia reported this discovery to Alan right away. While everyone was busy researching the virus, they completely failed to notice that Doran's assistant John had secretly left the research base. He used a prepared small satellite signal transmitter to tell a mysterious person all the situation. It's also worth noting that in the corner chosen by John, there are monkeys frozen into ice sculptures everywhere around. Obviously, the secrets of this research room are more complicated than Alan and the others expected. After completing all this, John went back to the research institute as if nothing had happened. Then, John came to Dr. Sanada and talked about the matters of the group's senior management, not knowing what he was plotting again. After continuous research, Alan and others in the laboratory found that the virus has the ability to make people mutate. The reason why Peter survived was precisely because he was infected with the virus, leading to a gene mutation. At the same time, under the influence of the virus's mutation effect, Peter, who escaped from the isolation area, showed no signs of being critically ill, but wandered around the base instead. He began to use the severed limb to attack scientists, and soon 5 people were attacked. But Peter didn't hurt them, only feeding the black blood from his mouth into their bodies. He was spreading the virus on a large scale. According to Alan's calculation, it was expected that there would be 18 new infection targets. Alan hoped to persuade these potential infected people to give themselves up, but Sanada, out of consideration for the safety of the base, believed that force must be used when necessary. Just at this time, Doran, who was dissecting a monkey, met with an infected person, but to her surprise, the infected person didn't attack Doran but kept telling Doran to escape. Although she didn't understand why, Doran decided to take the opportunity to escape first, but unexpectedly, the infected person suddenly launched an attack on Doran. But suddenly, she spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted to the ground. Doran survived by chance. Sarah ran into the fleeing Peter in the warehouse. The other person didn't attack Sarah, but advised her to be wary of Sanada. Before Sarah could ask further, Peter got into the ventilation duct again and disappeared. Sarah told Alan about this matter. After a moment of thinking, Alan thought Sanada was very suspicious, but to figure out the reason, it was necessary to find his younger brother Peter first. So soon after, Assistant John climbed into the ventilation duct to look for Peter's trace, while Alan carried out real-time monitoring through the monitor. Not long after, John found Peter, but Peter launched an attack on John. By the time Alan arrived, Peter had already left. Afterwards, he examined John and confirmed that he wasn't infected by Peter. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, after carefully watching Peter's previous research videos, Julia accidentally found that Peter was actually using his own research results to develop new reagents. She decided to repeat Peter's experiment with mice. Julia injected the 2 replicated reagents into different mice respectively. The later results shocked her very much, because all mice injected with reagent A would quickly ulcerate and die, without exception, while a very small number of mice injected with reagent B could survive. These mice were covered with black blood vessels all over their bodies, and became very irritable. Julia told her ex-husband Alan about the discovery right away. Alan realized the seriousness of the situation and asked Julia and Sarah to go monitor those infected people who were willing to isolate themselves voluntarily. Alan was worried that these people would also do something irreversible under the influence of the virus. Just then, an expert in the research institute seemed to have discovered the secret of the base and planned to leave by snowmobile. John actually killed him. The expert's body was quickly found by Alan and others, and then it was investigated that John was the murderer. Alan became more and more confused about this, not understanding what the people in this research institute were hiding. He found John and asked him to explain the truth. John remained silent throughout. While the two were in a stalemate, an accident occurred again. When Julia was taking a bath, Peter suddenly broke in and infected her. When Alan found Julia, she had fainted to the ground, and completely forgot what had happened before. This made Alan very worried, but because the two were no longer husband and wife, he couldn't stay there for a long time, and could only guard outside the door, trying to catch his younger brother Peter. Just then, Alan heard a strange sound coming from the pipeline above his head. He followed the sound to a laboratory, and found his younger brother Peter there. As soon as Alan wanted to step forward to arrest him, the other person suddenly fainted. He could only take Peter to the laboratory first, and wait for him to wake up before questioning. When Sanada and John saw the unconscious Peter, their expressions became solemn right away, as if they didn't want Alan to catch him. After that, Sanada also kept resisting Alan staying by Peter's side, and insisted on isolating him in a more remote area. Although Alan was very reluctant, the other person's reason was very reasonable, leaving Alan with no chance to refuse. Finally, he could only agree. Then Sanada took Alan to the second underground floor. which was once used for nuclear fusion experiments. It was not only strong but also very safe, making it very suitable as an isolation place. In this way, under Alan's proposal, this floor became a new isolation area. Then all the infected people including Peter were transferred here, and the remaining personnel stayed on the upper floor to continue researching the antidote. Just then, a female infected person suddenly appeared in front of them, seemingly wanting to seek help, but before Alan could respond, the security personnel fired a gun. Luckily, Alan took quick measures to save her life. Then he ordered people to transfer the female infected person to the underground isolation area as well. Alan told everyone his decision and announced that Sarah would be responsible for detecting whether personnel were infected, while Doran would continue to study monkeys to obtain the antidote to the virus as soon as possible. But when Doran came to the dissection room, she found that the monkey was gone. She thought it was Sonata's doing, and wanted to go find him to argue, but was suddenly stopped by her assistant John. Then John took her outside the base, took samples from the pile of frozen monkeys to continue the research. Doran was very shocked at the sight of the frozen monkeys all over the ground. She was curious about how John knew the situation here. In response, John always avoided answering, only vaguely revealing that everything in the base was controlled by the military, and he had to strictly keep the secret. Doran didn't ask more questions. She brought back the blood samples as planned to further replicate the virus for research. Just when the experiment was in progress, a terrible thing suddenly happened. The virus actually reproduced at an amazing speed.
Так и должно быть.
Doran wanted to question Sonata right away about what kind of research was being carried out, but John stopped her again. He bluntly said that if she went there like this, both she and himself would be made into ice sculptures like those monkeys. Hearing this, Doran was stunned again, and she could only bear it first and make long-term plans. Alan, the team leader, was putting pressure on Sonata. After he found 2 more infected people, he learned from them that the mysterious virus now appearing in the base was actually a new type of drug they were researching, which Sonata had never revealed to Alan. He was eager to know how far Sonata's research had gone. Under Alan's coercion, Sonata finally told the truth. The base was indeed developing a universal drug that could cure all viruses, but the drug was very unstable, and the 2 current results were both failures. The mortality rate of drug A was as high as 100%, and although drug B was better, the mortality rate was also 80%. At the same time, Sarah finally developed a method for infection testing. The reagent would turn light green right away, as long as it came into contact with the mysterious virus, so that the infected target could be determined. Hearing the news, Julia had an idea. She did forget the previous attack, so while Sarah was away, Julia secretly conducted an experiment on herself. Seeing that the reagent didn't change color, Julia breathed a sigh of relief. Not long after, they used this reagent to test all the researchers in the laboratory and isolate the infected. Everything seemed to be moving in a good direction. A female infected person suddenly became manic, attacked the guard, escaped from the isolation room, and madly attacked everyone she saw along the way. Witnessing all this, Julia immediately flashed back to her experience in the bathroom. The next second, she actually spat out a mouthful of black blood. Julia looked at it in disbelief. Because her reagent clearly didn't change color, Julia realized right away that the reagent was useless, or rather, its effect was very unstable. Before Julia could lock herself in the isolation area, she called Alan but found that the communication here was actually blocked. It turned out that just a few minutes ago, Alan found that the situation here had completely exceeded his expectations, and with his ability, he simply couldn't handle the current situation. Therefore, he planned to use a military satellite to contact the military, and physically erased the whole research institute. But unexpectedly, the news leaked. Upon hearing this, Sonata and John's faces suddenly changed. Then, the satellite receiver near the base was destroyed by them with bombs. For days past, and the people locked in the isolation area completely lost contact with Alan and others on the 2nd floor. Seeing that the food was running out, they also became restless. Some people believed that Alan and others had abandoned them. In this situation, a tiny number of isolated people decided to die, together with those upstairs. According to their plan, as long as the air filter was turned off, the air upstairs would be exhausted after 6 hours. Julia firmly opposed this. She believed that Alan would never give up on her, but the others present were unwilling to believe Julia. Everyone isolated and excluded her, which made her very uncomfortable. She could only choose to go for a walk in the corridor. Unexpectedly, she found a mysterious person in a protective suit, constantly waving to her. Julia followed directly. In the blink of an eye, the mysterious person disappeared, and the whole corridor was empty. Julia felt very astonished. The satellite receiver was still not repaired, and Alan, who had been waiting for 4 days, was very anxious. He was well aware that the food for the people in the isolation area was about to run out. Therefore, Alan had proposed letting them return to the upper area first, but Sonata firmly opposed the infected people going upstairs. He always insisted that he would develop an antidote as soon as possible, and only when the safety of everyone was ensured could those people be allowed to come up. Alan couldn't refute either. The only thing he could do was to help develop the antidote as soon as possible. For this reason, he decided to conduct a live experiment on his younger brother, even though Alan was well aware of the dangers involved. But for the sake of more people, he couldn't care so much anymore. Alan injected Peter right away with the initially researched therapeutic drug. Under Alan's nervous gaze, the drug quickly took effect. Before long, Peter calmed down and his consciousness gradually recovered. This result made Alan overjoyed. After a long time, he talked with his brother again, but before chatting a few words, he was interrupted by Sarah, who suddenly came. The other person confessed the news that the test reagent had problems not long ago. Upon learning this news, Alan's just relaxed heart tensed up again. Luckily, the drug he just developed seemed to be able to treat this mysterious virus. Shortly after Sarah left the isolation room, her body suddenly experienced severe pain. Sarah wasn't infected. This was just her old injury. Not long ago, Sarah had a tumor operation, and now her body hadn't fully recovered. She didn't want to make others worry, so she went to the warehouse alone to look for morphine for pain relief. Alan learned something about the virus through talking with his brother. Originally, this research had nothing to do with Peter, but he wanted to prove himself, and coupled with Sonata's instigation, it eventually led to the current situation. As soon as the words fell, Peter fell into a coma again, and then his heartbeat suddenly stopped. Luckily, Alan was by his side. After some emergency rescue, he pulled Peter back from the brink of death, but his condition was very bad. He had been in a coma, and he was likely to only become a vegetable in the future. Perhaps this was the side effect of the medicine. At the same time, the condition of the infected people in the base continued to deteriorate, and they became brutal zombies. Julia was almost attacked, and she was able to escape, only with the help of another doctor, Anna. In order to survive, the two went to the warehouse to look for supplies, but unexpectedly found the inscriptions left by Julia before behind the shelves, indicating that she had been here at some point. But Julia herself had no impression of this. Some survivors had fallen into despair, because the air was gradually running out. At this time, Sonata came to them with his assistant Matt, trying to persuade the three rebellious people. He said that he would try his best to ensure their safety, and hoped that they could reopen the air filter. Perhaps they were moved by Sonata's words, and the three actually let down their guard. But unexpectedly, at this time, Sonata suddenly shot and killed them. After all, as long as these people were killed, the air system could still be restored. Sonata asked his assistant Matt to deal with the bodies, and he himself set off to look for Julia. Then he came to the second floor and happened to meet a zombie-infected person. But when the other person saw Sonata, they didn't attack, but fled to the side in horror. Obviously, there were major secrets hidden in Sonata. After several days of hard work, Doran finally made a breakthrough in virus research. Just when she was ready to report the results, her assistant John suddenly attacked her, and Doran had no breath before she could react. Then John disguised the scene as an accident. Then, John went outside the base, spilled gasoline, and burned all the monkey ice sculptures. At this time, John took out his phone. It turned out that everything he had just done was just a task arranged for him by the behind-the-scenes employer. After receiving John's message, the other person arranged a new task for him right away. The other person required John to take away a doctor named Zach from the research base. John had never heard of this person, and the research institute had more than 20 floors, with countless researchers inside. So John broke into Director Sonata's office, and used his computer to search for information on Zach. But the search results surprised John greatly. There was no information about Dr. Zach at all, excluding the possibility that the behind-the-scenes employer was playing tricks on him. It could only be that Sonata had meddled in it. But before John could look into further, Sonata's assistant Matt suddenly walked in. John stood up right away, pretending to have just passed by, and took the opportunity to inquire about Dr. Zach from Matt. But Matt didn't know this person at all, and then he drove John out of the office. As for Dr. Sonata, who was unaware that John had sneaked into his office at this time, he was busy looking for Julia. Sonata forged the wounds from the attack, then found Julia and Anna, lying that he was attacked by the people on the second floor, while providing supplies for them, and hoped that the two could help. Julia was very troubled by Sonata's request. After all, she was also trapped here and couldn't get out. Sonata said right away that he knew of an emergency passage that could cross this floor, but it might be dangerous on the way. Hearing that they could leave here, Julia decided to help Sonata. Then, with her and Anna's support, Sonata guided the two to the emergency passage, and then they saw the danger that Sonata had mentioned. In the end, only Sonata and Julia escaped into the laboratory next to the corridor. After a short rest, the two were ready to move on, but they were attacked by zombie-infected people before walking far. In the nick of time, Anna suddenly appeared and successfully saved the two. With Anna's help, Julia was able to perform a simple operation on Sonata, but Anna disappeared for no reason, although Julia was very willing to believe. According to the current situation, it was basically certain that Anna was just Julia's hallucination. Everything before was actually Julia's own actions. This inference made Julia feel incredible. She didn't understand why this was happening, and could only suspect that it might be related to the infection of the mysterious virus. At the same time, Alan finally found Doran, who had been attacked by John. Judging from the scene, it was mostly an accident, but the timing was really too coincidental. Alan had a faint unease in his heart, and he recalled that Doran had physical examinations every year, and couldn't suddenly have problems leading to an accident. This made Alan more certain that Doran's death wasn't an accident. Thinking of this, Alan believed that the greatest threat at present wasn't the virus, but the secrets hidden in the base, so Alan went to the monitoring room to check the previous surveillance videos of the laboratory, only to find that the videos had already been deleted. Without much thought, it must be the work of the mastermind behind the scenes. Alan couldn't determine who the murderer was for a while, when Matt suddenly said that John had done it, but Matt didn't produce conclusive evidence, so Alan didn't easily believe it. After he left, Matt stared meaningfully at the monitoring screen, then called up John's trace from it and found that he was talking to a doctor. And it seemed to be about Dr. Zach. But this time, John learned that Dr. Zach couldn't contact others due to illness, and seemed to be locked up somewhere at present. Seeing this scene, Matt thought the other person's previous behavior of probing about Dr. Zach, and had a guess in his heart immediately. He found John right away and said that he already knew the other person's purpose, but Matt didn't expose it. Just let John clean up the relevant traces. With Matt's instruction, John hurried to the mortuary, and prepared to deal with Doran's body again, only to find that Alan was here performing an autopsy on Doran. Alan had noticed the pinhole on Doran's neck, and was very sure that she was murdered, which made John very uneasy. Sarah suddenly found that the doctor was gone. She was worried that the other person had an accident, so she hurried out to look for him, but found that the doctor had left by himself. But her current state was very wrong, just like being drunk. Sarah stepped forward to try to communicate, but the other person directly attacked. Luckily, Sarah reacted quickly so that no irreparable impact was caused. After finally calming the doctor down, the other person became very weak, as if suffering great pain. Just at this time, Alan found Sarah and told her the inference that Doran was murdered. He was going to discuss with Sarah how to deal with it next, but found that Sarah had taken a lot of morphine, and was also in a very wrong state now. Alan reprimanded the other person for abusing drugs, then left angrily, not giving Sarah a chance to explain at all. After leaving from her, Alan happened to meet John. The other person lied that there was a doctor named Zach, who had been assisting Doran in research before, and the other person seemed to know the secrets of the base. Maybe it was Zach who murdered Doran, under John's agitation. Alan ran to ask Matt if he knew about Dr. Zach. Matt understood the reason right away and pointed the finger at John, saying that there was evidence of John murdering Doran in his room. Although Alan didn't believe it, he couldn't rule out the possibility of what the other person said, so the two went to search John's room together, and actually found some dangerous items, such as a bundle of bombs, a small satellite signal receiver, and the mobile phone he used to contact the behind-the-scenes employer. Thinking of the previous incident that the satellite receiver was bombed, Alan guessed right away that John was the murderer behind it. Just when he was astonished at this discovery, he found that Matt had disappeared without a trace, and for some reason, he even came to the base and started a mysterious device. Then, a container loading with Dr. Zach's head was presented in front of him. Before Alan could react, John appeared behind him like a ghost, then knocked him out and quickly snatched the container. But to his surprise, on the way back, John met with Matt, who was anxiously looking for Alan. Seeing that the matter was exposed, John attacked Matt, and the other person was knocked to the ground on the spot. John continued to flee and used the equipment to send a message to the behind-the-scenes employer. Just then, Matt actually woke up again, decisively shot and killed the other person. Then Matt took away the container with Dr. Zach's head. At the same time, overnight, John's body was quietly dragged away by a mysterious figure. Of course, Alan was completely unaware of all this. He merely demanded that Matt find the escaped John as soon as possible. In the base, Sarah slowly wheeled the deceased doctor in front of Alan. At the same time, seeing more and more infected people dying, Alan had only one urgent thought in his mind: to rush back to the second floor and bring Julia back safely. But Matt stopped his risky move. Under the other person's dissuasion by force, Alan could only agree to make long-term plans, but it was obvious that he didn't think so in his heart. Now, with John missing and Doran dead, the whole base was full of dangers. Alan couldn't rest assured about Julia anyway, so he decided to sneak into the second floor without telling others. At the same time, Julia's hallucinations became more severe. She frequently dreamed of her childhood self and even saw Peter intact. Just as Julia was about to say something to him, a scream from outside the door woke her up from her dream. Julia curled up in panic. When she came to her senses, she was horrified to find that the signs of infection on her body were increasingly worsening. She barely maintained her blurred consciousness, and asked Sanada to check her wound. At this time, Sanada's injury had improved a lot, and he could communicate normally. Julia couldn't help asking the doubt that had been in her heart, asking Sanada why he didn't tell her that Anna was fake. In response, Sanada claimed that according to Julia's current situation, a fake friend was more beneficial for her to resist infection. But before Sanada could finish speaking, Julia's condition suddenly worsened, and she fell into a coma in just a moment. Seeing this, Sanada took out a mysterious red reagent and injected it into Julia's body. Before long, Julia's painful symptoms significantly eased. After completing all this, Sanada turned around and quietly left the room through a secret passage. Alan and Sarah successfully sneaked into the second floor. Looking at the chain door in front of them, Alan planned to directly saw the chains apart with a saw, but just then, a sudden attack caught Alan and Sarah off guard, and they were almost all infected by the mysterious virus. After finally getting rid of those infected people, Alan decided to temporarily give up the action and continue in-depth research on the virus. Through the continuous efforts of the two, the research made a major breakthrough again. They found that the virus was actually artificially created and contained a certain strange substance, but it was temporarily impossible to determine what the substance was used for. Just at this time, Sanada, the head of the research institute, went back, and Alan stepped forward to question him. When Sanada saw that the other person had found a clue, he continued to lie right away to cover it up. Sanada claimed that this substance could cure all incurable diseases, but he never revealed the specific ingredients. Alan failed to get a satisfactory answer, and could only look into alone in private, trying to figure out what Sanada was hiding. Assistant Matt confessed to Sanada the fact that he had solved John, and Sanada showed great concern after hearing it. From the conversation between the two, it could be known that Sanada seemed to worry that this move would cause greater trouble, but what they didn't know was that John wasn't really dead. He was taken away by a mysterious person, and now he woke up again in a family's house. It was learned that this was the residence of Lena, the only sheriff in the Arctic region. The reason why the other person decided to bring John here was to thoroughly look into everything that happened in the laboratory. Lena led John into a room which was covered with photos of all missing children in the past 20 years. According to Lena's investigation, these children were all inextricably linked to this base, so she was eager to uncover the secrets behind this base. Regarding this, John naturally remained tight-lipped and kept looking for opportunities to escape. In the afternoon of the same day, John finally found an opportunity to escape. He spent a lot of effort to unlock the handcuffs, but just as John was about to flee, he accidentally stumbled upon Lena and Matt having a private meeting. This set off alarm bells for John, but upon further understanding, it was found that the person in front of him wasn't the real Matt, but Lena's younger brother Tony. It turned out that Lena had two younger brothers, one of whom was abducted when he was a child, so she had been searching for his trace for many years. John vaguely guessed that Lena's missing younger brother was exactly Matt. After thorough research, Alan and Sarah found that these viruses could be killed by ultra-low temperature, so the two conducted an experiment on Peter right away. This method was indeed effective, but the temperature used now was not low enough, and a stronger cold source was needed to completely remove the virus from Peter's body. At this time, Sarah suddenly remembered that a certain floor of the laboratory had been used for cold precipitation experiments, and maybe a solution could be found there. So Alan found Dr. Aid and obtained a stronger cold source. With the help of the other person, in the following tests, Peter's condition indeed improved, but they didn't know that Sanada and Matt had been monitoring their progress from the outside. Regarding the discovery of the two, Sanada seemed to have expected it. He only watched for a while, then took Matt to leave the base, preparing to clean up John's body. When the two came to the snow, they found that John's body had disappeared. Just then, several helicopters suddenly landed at the base. Seeing the markings on the planes, Sanada's face immediately became solemn, for he recognized this as the helicopter team of the group's senior management. At the same time, Julia finally woke up. Her eyeballs turned into a strange white, and the infection on her body had healed. A team of fully armed soldiers quickly got off the helicopter, led by Susan, the head of the group. Susan informed Sanada and others that she was here to supervise his drug development, and results must be obtained within 2 days. For this reason, Susan even promised that Alan could put forward any request. Alan said he wanted to bring Julia here, and Susan agreed without hesitation. Then she talked with Sanada alone. It turned out that the reason why the group sponsored this base was that it wanted to study the poison that could create incurable diseases, while researching the drug that could cure any incurable disease. This way, they could make the value of the group soar. But at present, Sanada had only invented the virus, and her patience had now run out. Susan demanded that the antidote be developed right away, otherwise everyone in the base would be buried with Sonata. Alan naturally didn't know this matter, but he found that Susan seemed to be hiding something, so Alan made some preparations. He decided to hide the antidote as a backup after it was developed. In addition, Alan also requested to go to the second floor with Susan's troops to look for his ex-wife. The abducted John had arrived at the base gate with Lena. Seeing that John was still alive, Matt looked shocked, but he still opened the base gate. Lena saw her younger brother and rushed up excitedly, then took out the photo of herself and her younger brother. Matt was immediately stunned. He couldn't accept this fact for a while, so he first ordered someone to control John, and interrogated Lena alone. Then he took Lena to a room. Seeing the childhood photos and the true feelings shown by Lena, Matt vaguely understood something. Perhaps Dr. Sonata, who had adopted him since childhood, was actually the culprit, who caused him to be separated from his family. Julia, who had completely recovered, firmly believed that her blood was very likely the key to breaking the virus, so she decided to take the risk of going back to the upper floor area. On the way, she met with a group of zombies. Similar to Sonata, these zombies fled in panic as soon as they saw Julia's eyes. Just at this time, Sonata unexpectedly appeared in front of Julia again, because he heard that Susan was going to lead people to search for Julia, so he decided to transfer Julia in advance. Then, when Sonata learned that Julia's infection had not only healed, but also strange changes had occurred in her eyes, he was so excited that tears welled up in his eyes. After some persuasion, he successfully convinced Julia to leave with him, in order to prevent the matter of Julia's eyes from being exposed. Sonata specially covered them with a cloth. Susan's team was also ready, since they had never seen infected people before. They were very vigilant. When they actually met with the infected, they found that they had underestimated them. A group of zombies suddenly emerged, with very strong combat effectiveness, and even fully armed soldiers were no match. Susan decided to abandon the plan to look for Julia, and quickly led the remaining men back upstairs. At this time, Julia had been taken back to Sonata's laboratory, and happened to run into Matt and Lena, who ordered someone to take Julia away. Sonata was unable to stop it at all, and could only secretly stuff a pair of contact lenses into Julia. Julia, who was taken back to the laboratory, soon met Alan, who went back from the second floor. The two hugged each other excitedly and wept with joy. Julia quickly told her ex-husband Alan that she had recovered. She thought that her blood could be used to develop related antidotes, but Alan thought the action was too risky. Just as he was about to think of a safer way, the alarm suddenly sounded. It turned out that the infected people on the second floor had sneaked into their floor through the ventilation duct and attacked the supply warehouse. But incredibly, this attack was very different from before, and was obviously organized and planned. After learning about this, Susan showed unparalleled calmness for some reason, and even allowed the situation to develop and spread. Alan found the tied-up Sonata and asked him if he had done anything to Julia on the second floor. After all, he was the only one who had contacted Julia during this period, and Alan strongly guessed that the other person had actually developed an antidote. But Sonata told Alan that Julia had got rid of the infection by herself. Then Sonata claimed that Julia's situation was very dangerous now, and she was likely to be noticed by the group, and then caught for lifelong research. After hearing this, Alan went back to Julia right away and found that she had been captured and imprisoned by Susan. They claimed that Julia had become an important asset of the group, and the antidote to the virus would be developed through her in the future. Julia naturally would not wait to be killed. She noticed the ventilation duct in the room, and prepared to escape through it, but the duct was full of zombies, and soon she met with two enemies. Strangely, they didn't attack her, but Julia's crisis wasn't over. The guards found her escape and quickly reported the matter to Susan, who ordered a search right away. At this time, Julia had climbed to the floor above Alan's laboratory, and contacted the two through a walkie-talkie. Alan asked Julia to rescue Sonata, and help him take over the base again. When Julia untied Sonata, the other person suddenly launched an attack, and stunned Julia with a sedative. When she woke up again, she found that she was holding half a photo in her hand, which showed her as a child. What surprised Julia even more was that Sonata was actually standing beside her. At the same time, Alan cleverly deceived the guards, claiming that they had successfully developed an antidote to lure Susan and others into the laboratory, but what they made was actually a chemical bomb. Taking advantage of the chaos, Alan and Sarah quickly fled the scene and hid in another laboratory. Unexpectedly, Susan didn't die in the explosion, and even only suffered minor injuries. She was so angry at Alan's behavior that she took his younger brother Peter as a hostage right away, threatening Alan to show up quickly. At this time, Sarah found a sonic weapon, which could make the target lose mobility in a short time, so Alan pretended to compromise and walked towards Susan. When the other person was off guard, Sarah quietly activated the sonic weapon, immediately making the two guards lose their combat effectiveness. Then the laboratory lost power inexplicably, and Sonata suddenly appeared. Taking advantage of the chaos at the scene, the three successfully rescued Peter. Sonata planned to take everyone to other floors, but before that, he needed to pick up Julia first. But when he went back to the laboratory, he found that Julia was missing again. After investigation, it was found that Julia had met with Susan's men, after waking up and had been taken away by them. At this time, in desperation, everyone could only act separately. Alan went to rescue Julia, and Sonata was responsible for killing Susan, but unexpectedly, Julia was now by Susan's side, and was about to be taken to the plane, which would separate her from Alan and the others forever. Luckily, Sonata arrived in time. Beyond everyone's expectations, Sonata's strength was very powerful. He killed Susan and her men with his bare hands, and successfully rescued Julia. Then he sealed Susan's head in another container, like he did with Zach's head, so the whole base was taken over by Sonata again. But at this time, most people in the base had been controlled by the infected, and they had to clear these things as soon as possible, so they used Sarah as bait to capture those infected, and it took a lot of effort to catch only one. For some reason, all the zombies on the second floor disappeared without a trace. Before long, Alan found that the infected had gone underground through a tunnel, and it seemed to be an area outside the laboratory, on the 20th floor. Later, through Sonata, it was learned that in addition to the 24th underground floor, there was actually a mysterious 25th floor deep in the ground of this laboratory, which was the laboratory's virus bank, storing the most primitive virus samples. Then, the few people saw through the monitoring screen in horror that the infected on the 25th floor were actually acting organized, and it was Alan's younger brother Peter, who was in the leadership position in the center. Those zombies also bowed to him one after another. Obviously, the situation had now completely gotten out of control, and since they killed the person in charge, Susan, it was estimated that within 2 days at most, the group would notice the anomaly here, and they would definitely send troops to suppress it by then. In order to prevent the original virus samples from falling into the hands of the group, they must destroy them before that. Alan proposed to divide into two groups. He and Julia would go to the 25th underground floor to destroy the virus, while Sonata and Sarah were responsible for destroying the base's temperature control system, and completely freezing the whole base. Soon after, the base temperature gradually dropped, and Alan and Julia quickly arrived at the 25th floor. Here were densely packed with infected people, but luckily, the low temperature made them temporarily lose their mobility. The two carefully passed through the zombie herd, and successfully came to the virus bank. Here were stored all the viruses in the world. Once leaked, the consequences would be unimaginable. Just as they were about to destroy the virus, Sarah's tumor suddenly broke out. In desperation, Sonata could only urgently restart the temperature control system. As the temperature rose, those zombies began to wake up one after another. Alan and the other person had to take advantage of the zombies not being fully awake to hurry out of the virus bank. The two had just managed to escape from death, but Julia stopped again. She accidentally found a passage leading to the underground. Continuing to go deep along the passage, they came to a warm apartment. Seeing the scene in front of her, Julia was immediately stunned, because it was actually exactly the same as her childhood home. Connecting with the previous half photo, Julia seemed to understand something, but now they had no time to delve deeper, and could only go back to the laboratory first. As soon as they went into the laboratory, they met with Peter. In addition, he was accompanied by a large group of infected people. In the nick of time, Julia revealed her white pupils, and the group of infected people right away fled in panic, so the two were able to survive. Later, they found Sonata and wanted to ask about the underground apartment, but learned that Sarah was in a critical condition, so the two had to put it aside first, and start treating Sarah. But during this period, Julia still seized the opportunity to be alone with Sonata, and asked about the underground apartment, thus learning an astonishing truth: she was actually Sonata's biological daughter. The same white pupils were the best proof of blood relationship. According to Sonata, when his wife accidentally discovered that he had kidnapped Inuit children, she angrily took her daughter and left, resulting in the father and daughter not seeing each other for many years. After hearing this, Julia asked right away why her eyes were different from ordinary people. Along the way, she had found more than once that as long as those infected people saw her eyes, they would flee in panic right away. But Sonata has always remained silent on this, which makes Julia unable to fully trust Sonata in her heart. At the same time, Alan found that the tumor in Sarah's body had begun to spread, and it was only a matter of time before it invaded the brain, and he felt powerless about this. Just then, Sonata found through monitoring that the pathogen had actually been stolen by a researcher named Aide, who had now fled the base. Sonata realized the seriousness right away. Once the virus spread, the whole world would fall into destruction. They used satellite positioning to look for Aide's location, and found that there was an abandoned monitoring station nearby, which was very suitable for temporary hiding. So the two went there in the blizzard, and sure enough, Aide was hiding in the monitoring station. Later, it was learned that this guy was actually an undercover agent of another group, and Aide tried to sell the virus to the other person in exchange for a huge reward. Luckily, Alan and they arrived in time to control Aide, thus avoiding the occurrence of a tragedy. Then the two worked in division of labor to try to contact the base. Alan found a backup generator and successfully turned on the lighting system, but Julia failed to repair the radio equipment and couldn't get in touch with the base. Just then, an accident occurred again. Luckily, Alan reacted quickly and took Julia into an underground passage he had found before, thus temporarily escaping, but learned an even more astonishing news because of this. In this dim underground space, they found a man with a pale face and pupils identical to Julia's. The other person seemed to be delirious, claiming that he had been imprisoned here for 30 years, but it was impossible, because this place had been abandoned for many years, with no food supplies, and normal humans could never survive. But in reality, everything the man said was true. From his fragmented words, it was learned that he and people like Julia were called immortals. They can survive 40 days without food, resurrect right away after death, and truly achieve immortality after experiencing 10,000 deaths. This was how the man survived in this abandoned monitoring station for more than 30 years. But endless reincarnation was like endless torture to him. The man hoped to complete the 10,000 times of immortality in a faster way, so he asked the two to end his life. Just when Alan and they were hesitating, the killer chased again and immediately controlled the two. Luckily, Matt arrived in time and successfully saved them. After escaping, the two decided to set the monitoring station on fire to end the man's pain. Under Sonata's guidance, Sarah conducted in-depth research on Julia's genes and found that her DNA could actually strengthen the immune system and directly attack tumors. Sarah was very shocked because she knew too well what this meant. Then Sonata injected Julia's cerebrospinal fluid into Sarah's body to help her wipe out the tumor. Just then, Alan and Julia went back to the base. Looking at the comatose Sarah, they told Sonata all about what they had met with underground, and the other person fell into silence after hearing it. After a long hesitation, Sonata revealed some truths. It turned out that he had long known the man, and even Sonata himself had imprisoned him there for torture. Many years ago, the man betrayed Julia's mother and joined the evil group. Sonata trapped him there to punish his betrayal. Then through Sonata's description, it was learned that the group's senior management were actually all immortals, 500 people in total. Such an astonishing news shocked Julia and them on the spot. While they were talking, Sarah's condition suddenly deteriorated, leaving only a few hours of life. In the nick of time, Julia resolutely injected her blood into Sarah's body. Under the influence of that powerful gene, Sarah quickly turned the corner, and even the tumor in her body was completely removed. But the crisis didn't end there. Sonata received a text message from the group. At least 100 armed soldiers were about to arrive at the base. In order to deal with the threat, Sonata arranged bombs in various areas of the base, and then he prepared to lead everyone to hide in the bunker he had built earlier, the underground apartment that Julia and Alan had found before, which had a secret passage leading directly to the ground. Sonata planned to detonate the bombs and die together with the enemy as soon as the group's people arrived. But worse things followed. Personnel in the base began to disappear strangely. Later investigations found that Peter led his zombie subordinates to capture them as experimental subjects. After collecting a large amount of virus-infected blood, Peter and others injected the blood into the water storage tank. Earlier, Alan had placed everyone in the same room to ensure their safety, which happened to give Peter an opportunity. They spread the blood throughout the room through pipes. When Alan went back, everyone was infected, the whole base fell, and only a few people including Alan survived. In an emergency, Alan suddenly remembered yesterday's experiment. They mixed the semi-finished antidote with cooling liquid for a mouse experiment, and found that the virus was successfully wiped out. Therefore, Sonata and Julia, the two immortals, came to the second floor in protective suits carrying the antidote. After using the cooling liquid to restrict the movement of the infected, the group injected them with the antidote right away. Before long, everyone, including Peter, went back to normal. After finally dealing with the infected, the base alarm suddenly sounded. The group's troops had already arrived. Alan and the others took their weapons and prepared to fight, but found that the approaching snowmobiles were empty. They realized something was wrong.
Нет, ложись!
Alan and they hurriedly retreated to the base, and the group's special forces took the opportunity to force an airdrop into the base. Sonata knew that the comers weren't friendly. The person in charge, known as Scythe, was the group's most terrifying killer. Seeing the bad situation, Matt pressed the bomb button right away. But the expected explosion didn't occur. It turned out that Scythe had long expected this move, and therefore carried an instrument to block the bomb signal in advance. If Scythe's mission this time hadn't been to bring back the virus, an antidote, and capture Sonata alive, he would probably have killed everyone present long ago. Inside the bunker, everyone nervously planned the next move. After Matt went up to check the situation, he failed to find the trace of Scythe and the other two. Alan guessed that they might be lurking in the dark and closely monitoring everyone's movements. Therefore, Alan decided to take Sonata back upstairs and deliberately expose their whereabouts to attract attention, while Julia and others stayed in the bunker. Things were indeed as Alan expected. Scythe was now closely watching all this through the monitoring screen. Then his gaze suddenly fell on Sonata, and for some reason Scythe was immediately furious, because Susan was his mother. In order to avenge the deep blood feud, Scythe launched a revenge operation. He saw Sonata and Alan preparing to organize personnel to evacuate the base and quietly followed them, but he didn't know it was just a trap. Sonata quickly detected Scythe's trace. He knew he was no match, so he only attracted the other person's attention as planned. Sonata threw the antidote onto the snowy ground beside him. Scythe's men hurried to pick it up, but unexpectedly, the ground suddenly collapsed, and they fell into the abyss. This was the carefully designed trap by Alan and the others, but they found that Scythe had actually disappeared, and obviously the ambush plan had failed. The situation at the base became more and more critical, and everyone had to return to the bunker to discuss the next countermeasures. Scythe learned that there was actually Sonata's daughter in the base, so he decided to use this as a breakthrough, to make Sonata also feel the pain of losing a loved one. Therefore, not long after, Alan and others were preparing to go to the laboratory to get the antidote and met with a power failure. While taking the elevator, although the emergency power supply system was activated, Julia mysteriously disappeared. They went back to the bunker right away to search, but only saw a jar dropped by Scythe, which contained a severed finger and a threatening letter. The severed finger obviously belonged to Julia. Faced with this cruel reality, they didn't know what to do for a while. In this very tense moment, Matt acted without authorization, resulting in his being caught by Scythe as well. When Sonata came to Scythe, Scythe forced him to make a choice: either save his biological daughter or choose his adopted son. Sonata fell into a dilemma. Just then, Matt chose to sacrifice himself for his adoptive father. The sudden change made Scythe feel very astonished, and Sonata seized the opportunity to subdue Scythe. But the danger didn't end there. Scythe still had a backup. His men opened the container they brought, and it turned out to be Julia's mother Insid. Julia and others learned of this through interrogation. In order to find out the specific location where their mother was detained, Alan kept torturing and interrogating Scythe, but the other person remained silent. After I don't know how long, Scythe suddenly mocked them to watch the news. Only then did they find that the virus from the base had actually spread. Plagues were breaking out in many areas, countless people had been infected, and I don't know how many people had died because of it. They hurriedly found Sonata. Sonata was equally shocked. He didn't understand how the virus had spread. The urgent task was to find Sonata's wife, Linda. Based on the layout of the base, they believed the security room was likely the enemy's operational base. The group decided to have Peter stay behind to assess the situation. The other three rushed to the operational base to rescue the trapped Linda. When they arrived at their destination, they were surprised to find that John was also there. Previously, he had been captured by Scythe's men. Luckily, John seized the opportunity to knock out the guard. This allowed him to escape from their grasp. John came here to rescue the kidnapped children. After successfully rescuing Linda, Sonata quickly wrote down the list of children and handed it to John. Sonata gave the antidote and virus samples to Alan. Peter secretly infiltrated the isolation room where Scythe was held. He was unaware that he had colluded with the group to become an immortal. This was to satisfy his desire for eternal life, so he could be forever with Julia. So Peter deliberately let Scythe go. Since her mother was rescued, Julia had been helping her regain consciousness. She was doing everything she could to help her mother recover. Due to Linda's prolonged captivity, her memory had deteriorated. It had regressed to Julia's childhood. She couldn't recognize the people around her at all. At this point, the base's alarm suddenly went off. Sonata and Alan armed themselves and went to the door to check. They discovered Lena and her brother had come to provide support. With heavy hearts, they informed each other. Matt's self-sacrifice left Lena almost immediately mentally shattered. As they were still immersed in the grief of losing loved ones, Peter, with a face full of scars, appeared. He reported to Alan that Scythe had escaped. The group dared not hesitate and prepared to evacuate right away. At this point, a researcher found Sarah. During her blood test, the researcher discovered that Sarah was pregnant. Upon hearing this sudden news, Sarah felt unsure of how to handle it, because during this time, the only person she had been in contact with was team leader Alan. She really didn't know how to tell him this news. As Alan was preparing to leave, he suddenly saw Scythe appear in front of him holding a bomb remote. Before he could react, Scythe pressed the button right away. Many researchers died in the ensuing fire. Then, Scythe took the opportunity to abduct Julia. When Alan saw his beloved being taken away, he jumped onto the helicopter after her. Julia was very touched by Alan's actions, but considering his safety, she decided to push Alan away. She was taken away by Scythe. Over 200 days passed in the blink of an eye. At this time, Alan was searching for clues about Julia, but he didn't expect that Julia not only hadn't been abused, but appeared to be radiant. She seemed to have become the leader of the 500 people in the group. The film ends here. Helix Season 1 premiered in January 2014. The film's theme isn't novel, it's a common zombie genre. The plot in the middle is truly hard to describe. Not only is the pacing slow, but in the early stages, everyone acted like riddles. In reality, this proved to be of little significance. The biggest highlight was surprisingly the suspense at the end. Such a large transformation occurred. Aside from that, do you have any other opinions? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoy my channel, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.